Hello again. In the current module, we will be looking at privacy and data protection, and we will try to understand how these things are connected with IoT and SCADA systems. So our goal will be to understand the basic concepts of privacy, to outline the connections to our particular topic, and to learn a little bit about data protection and the history of data protection. We will have a look at the following issues in our diverse sections of that unit. First, we will ask ourselves, what is privacy? I will have a short look into the sociology of surveillance, where there are interesting models about human behavior, and I will present some case studies of privacy. And finally, we will have a look into specific questions for IoT. The most famous wrong interpretation of internet privacy took place in 1993 when in the New Yorker, Peter Steiner published the cartoon with the famous meme, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." And if you look at the internet privacy from today's perspective, dog would be probably connected to various dog books, and all details about our dog would be known to everybody in the social network of the dog. And of course, also this has been captured by a caricature where we see 22 years after that first famous cartoon, these two dogs sitting together and discussing and talking to each other. Remember when, on the internet, nobody knew who you were? Today, the situation is different. The situation with regard to privacy. But what, after all, is privacy? It is a somewhat diffuse concept where we would first like to try to do some mappings on understandings of this interesting notion. And I would like to present to you 4 possible cognitive mappings of privacy, which I take out of the dissertation of a PhD student of mine who worked on privacy a number of years ago. I will be presenting 4 perspectives. Privacy in private, which stipulates the right to be left alone. Privacy in public, which is connected with informational self-determination, a word also often used in the German approach to privacy. Interpersonal privacy will look at privacy as a valuable good, which, as all goods, can be exchanged for other values. And there is the sad and negative approach, zero privacy. There is none, forget about it. Let's have a look at how these perspectives came into being. Privacy in private has the doctrine that there is the unalienable right to be left alone. And as many other new concepts, it also was the consequence of a new technological development. Here it was photography, which eventually led to social and legal understandings and changing of the respective consequences. The US Supreme Court recognized privacy and described it as the right to be left alone in the Warren and Brandeis decision about photographic privacy. But they are taking a binary view on privacy. There is the public sphere, which you share with others. There's the private sphere, for which you have a right to enter. There you are left alone. Privacy in public or informational self-determination has the doctrine that every individual has the right to decide on the fine granular details of privacy, meaning informational self-determination, which is explained as the right of the individual to decide on which data on that individual may be utilized by others in which manner. And a second aspect, which sometimes tends to be forgotten but also has to be connected with informational self-determination, is the decision on those data which may affect the individual. From history, we have to go back to the Volkszählung, to the situation where in Germany the government wanted to register and count people. And here we have to have that understanding of the then time, the final decision being made in 1983. We see a population driven by young people whose parents and grandparents had made bad experiences with privacy during the Second World War times. You could suffer death by a violation of your privacy. Somebody knowing your religious, your ideological, your political beliefs, having this divulged in public, could lead to your ending in a concentration camp. So these people were educated that privacy was a very strong and important value, and they protested, as we see in this picture, against registering and counting by the state. These protests eventually went up to the Supreme Court, and the court then decided, in the German text, wer nicht mit hinreichender Sicherheit überschauen kann, welche ihn betreffenden Informationen in bestimmten Bereichen seiner sozialen Umwelt bekannt sind, kann in seiner Freiheit wesentlich gehemmt werden. Let's have a look, we are an English-speaking summer school, let's have a look into my personal English translation of what the court said here. Persons who are unable to recognize with a sufficient degree of certainty which information on them are known, in which areas of their social spheres, are significantly restricted in their freedom. Who is insecure whether their deviating behavior might at any time be registered and permanently stored, used, or transmitted, will attempt not to be seen with such behavior. Who considers that participating in a convocation or gathering of citizens is officially registered and might turn into a risk, will abstain from exercising these fundamental rights. The court, therefore, recognized this particular aspect of privacy and for the first time stipulated a right for privacy at the level of one of the highest court systems in Germany. And actually this was believed to be so important that even a stamp was issued for celebrating 30 years of that Volkszählungsurteil and underlying its importance for politics and freedom. A third approach to privacy is interpersonal privacy. Privacy, so the respective doctrine, is an abstract good. It has a tradable economic value, and as a good with economic value, it can be exchanged and traded, as we are widely familiar with in the internet. You are trading your search profile for free Google queries. You are trading machine learning access to your email account for free XYZ, name it, Gmail, Yahoo, Web, GMX, mail services. And the machine learning access, of course, then translates the mails you read and write into ads which are presented as part of that mail service. It trades free map services for your location profile and pretty much every free digital service, and many non-free services as well are using these types of economic use cases. This poses a number of important questions. Question number one is, who knows the value of the data? Is $0.1 or $100 an appropriate price for a single Google query? What about the value of disclosing my search profile at an appropriate price? What would be the value of disclosing my social profile, my search profile, all the other information? Can I, as an end user, reasonably assess the value of disclosing that information? What are advantages, disadvantages of keeping these data private? And I have the hypothesis that most end users are not able to properly evaluate the economic value of their data, since they don't have the perspective which is available to the service providers such as Google or Facebook. So, as end user, you cannot really make an informed decision regarding the value of your privacy. And this is an important aspect because it's significantly different from all other economies where you know you're paying your price in a convertible currency, in euros, in dollars, whatever. And it poses a severe disadvantage for the end user because he has no understanding of the proper price. And the second question is, who should own the value of that data? And there again, numerous approaches to that, numerous possible answers you could give. One option could be society, in the interest of a higher good. Look at the discussion we are having right now. Personal movement profiles and corona infection are closely connected, and there could be an interest of the general public, of the society, in certain aspects of your movement profiles. Again, maybe better treatment could be developed if one had access to your data because you are having a particular rare disease. Should you have the right of keeping that private from society? Questions. A second option, service providers and developers. They are interested in providing and improving services, in making better marketing decisions, and if we kind of move a little bit further, in better economic exploitation of their customers. Is it in your interest? In their interest? The data subjects themselves think of the Volkszählungsurteil. You yourself have, in the concept of informational self-determination, the right to decide about that. Option 4, 5, 6, 7, there might be other solutions. We currently are discussing these things in society. And finally, the fourth, the last and very radical option, zero privacy. And here, Scott McNealy, who coined that term, said, you have zero privacy. Get over it. But his very radical approach didn't stay without protest. There's an interesting counter-argument against zero privacy by Jacob Appelbaum. He's a cryptographic researcher and a privacy activist, and once in a video said that he had heard quite a lot of people talk about post-privacy. And they talk about it in terms of feeling like, it's too late, we're done for, there's just no possibility for privacy left anymore, and we just have to get used to it. And he then continues to point out that this is a fascinating thing because it seems to him that you never hear a feminist say that we are post-consent because there is rape. And why is that? The reason is that it's bullshit. So maybe that's the right answer for the doctrine of zero privacy. It's bullshit. But we have all these different approaches to privacy, and currently we face a situation where society is discussing what is the right approach to privacy. So let's ask people who are more knowledgeable about society, let's ask sociologists what they think about the sociology of surveillance. And I would like to present to you first the theory of the panopticon and then argue a little bit that it has a certain relevancy with connection to our privacy. Jeremy Bentham, who was living around 1748, died in 1832, was an English philosopher who invented a concept of an economically efficient prison. And you'll see it on the left side of that slide. The architecture here has been drawn according to his theory. And the idea, the goal was the economical, efficient prison. Efficient meaning low costs for surveillance. It took up 3 ideas. Prisoners are not aware if a guard is present. Prisoners cannot see if and when and who is observing them, and they therefore get the illusion of a constant observation. It's not really clear whether they are under constant observation, but they have that feeling they are observed all the time. And in fact, this panopticon had even been built once, and the Presidio Modelo on Cuba shows us an example how such a prison looks like. And now, let's focus a little bit on the protected cell of the guardian, the close-up version, and we understand. The prisoners in their individual cells have no good possibility of communicating among themselves. They are isolated. They don't know. Is there a guard in the center? Where is the guard looking at? And the theory now, which is connected with the mechanism of the panopticon, is the following. Data collections take their effect by their mere existence through the fantasy of the observed person that the person is watched and observed by a guard. The idea is observed persons, particularly when helpless, when isolated and under constant surveillance, or at least under the illusion of constant surveillance, will adapt their behavior to what they believe are the norms of the observer. Or put short, observation is manipulation of your behavior. We know this also by the word of self-censoring, which in the German language sometimes also is coined by the Schere im Kopf, the scissors in your brain, which cuts away thoughts you have the feeling you shouldn't have, and you already cut it away in your brain without even mentioning your thoughts. And it's also connected to what sociologists sometimes call the Erwartungserwartung. Our behavior is governed by the expectation of the expectation. So it's a double-level concept. Humans behave according to that theory. Humans behave according to what they expect that others expect them to do. So far, the theory of the panopticon. But of course, the question now is this a measurable effect? Or is it just a lively fantasy of sociology? As computer scientists, we are engineers. As engineers, we want to do experiments, we want to look at empirical studies. And I would like to give you 3 examples of empirical studies which found a little bit the hypothesis that the answer is yes, there are measurable effects. As a first example, I would like to look into the conformity experiments of Solomon Asch. We will have a look at the Wikipedia chilling effect study, and we will have a quick look at the eye poster experiment of Netle. We will come to the conclusion that these effects of surveillance can be measured. Let's check for the beginning the conformity experiment of Solomon Asch. The task as it is communicated to the test person is to compare the length of a given stick to a reference length. So reference lengths are given on a blackboard or on the slide as you see them here on the current slide, A, B, and C. And the idea is first that you get an understanding of the relationships. A stick is shown to you and the instructor says that's B. Then he shows a shorter stick and says now that was A. And now the turn is for you to do so. Your first thought is that this actually is an easy task. But do you as a test person, there are a number of aspects in this experiment which you are not familiar with. There is only one test person, you. All the others in the room are instructed actors. And you as test person by chance are sitting last in a group of 8 people, and therefore you always have to answer last. And after a few rounds of correct answers, something interesting happens. Occasionally, all actors consistently give wrong answers. So the instructor holds up a stick and you immediately see that's the length A, but the first person in the group says it's B, and the second says it's B, and the next says it's B again, and you're kind of thinking, but, well, actually, that's A. Now it's your round to give the vote. Do you say your opinion, or do you give into group pressure? The setup does not test vision, but the setup tests how the test person reacts to group pressure. And the interesting result of ASH is that only 33% refuse the conformity into obviously wrong answers. ASH draws interesting conclusions. He formulates in one of his publications, the tendency to conformity in our society is so strong that reasonably intelligent and well-meaning young people are willing to call white black. This is a matter of concern. It raises questions about our ways of education and about the values that guide our conduct. He also interviews the people, and most of them said that they did not really believe their conforming answers, but had gone along with the group for fear of being ridiculed or thought peculiar, different. A few of them said that they really did believe the group answers were correct. Now there is an antithesis. This experiment has been also criticized as reflecting the spirit of the 1950s, and there is the hypothesis that these days it might work out differently. But the synthesis with other experiments confirm that conformity actually can be a social problem. Being watched, acting in conformance with those who watch you. The topic of privacy. There is another interesting study which is known as Wikipedia Chilling Effect Study. The background of this study is that Edward Snowden, and you might be familiar with his revelations, described that the NSA is digitally tracking people who are reading Wikipedia articles they considered in a certain framing as suspicious. For example, people informing themselves on terrorism by reading Wikipedia articles about terrorism were digitally tracked by the NSA. The question in this study now was, did this revelation actually influence the viewers of such articles? Did less people watch such articles, for example? Did they surf differently? And the answer is clearly yes. There is a significant reduction in page views, as can be observed in our publication. I cited it as reference 10, and here we see an example. We see this sudden drop in Wikipedia articles after the moment of the Snowden revelations. More details you can find in the relevant publication. So, of course, if we have a look at these types of things, there is the follow-up question. Since the effect is measurable, is the effect wanted by society? And we could say yes. If it is, for example, reduction of bike theft, and we'll see such an example in the next study. And we could say no, if it's chilling effect on people reading, informing themselves on Wikipedia. Has the effect been authorized by a democratic decision? And is the public even aware of the effects? Let's have a look at another interesting example, the eye poster experiments made by Daniel Netle. Daniel Netle had a look in a series of experiments at posters showing a pair of watching eyes printed on a sheet of paper, and he found out that they can significantly change human behavior in quite a number of different settings. Let's have a look at two settings here. One setting is the famous scenario where we have a commons room and, well, if you use milk in your coffee, you're supposed to put in a coin into a common Sparschwein, as we say in German, into a common collecting basket of money. And the question is how much money is paid per liter of milk consumed. And what we see here is, like on the one side, on the left side, the image which was in display in that room, which 1 week was a poster with eyes watching that person. And in another week was a poster showing some flowers or some innocent environment. And if we have a look at the amount of money paid per liter of milk consumed in that week, we see an interesting connection. There is a second variant I would like to present, which was this placard of cycle thieves, we are watching you. And this placard was presented on a university campus, and at places where this placard was placed, cycle theft was reduced by 62%. That's an impressive number. But there was also another effect here, because in places without that poster, cycle theft went up by 65%. So the conclusion is, when we are watched, when we have the fantasy we are watched, when we are even watched only by printed eyes on paper, we react on this. There is an effect of surveillance on our behavior, which might be wanted or not, but which probably hasn't sufficiently been discussed. Let's have a look at 3 case studies on privacy. The first case study will look into cookie pricing and will ask the provocative question, what could you do to pay a bit more in the internet? The second one is about hygiene. Do you wash your hands after the toilet? And the third one is about what can be learned by watching your connections in social networks. So let's have a look at this slide here. And on this slide you see the same trip at the same date in the same class by an airplane. But it looks like there is a considerable difference in the prices you have to pay. And actually, the only difference here is browser history. And we see the same situation in the next page, where we are renting a car, and again, the only difference between these two screenshots is browser history. They are trying to hide it a little bit better. They're kind of like showing you a different sequence of the offered rentals, but again, the difference is browser history. People are tracked, and the price you have to pay is finally dependent on what the commercial website knows about you as customer. And it was actually very interesting for me to see when I showed these studies in a lecture. A couple of years ago, later, a student after the lecture sent me an email and said, well, Professor Kapp, your lectures really bring me bare money. I profited from your advice to clear the browser history and to think what would perhaps be known about myself as a customer. And he sent me the following 2 screenshots, which I'm here reproducing. You see the price of particular contact lenses. On the left-hand side, you see 23.99 euros. On the right-hand side, you see 20.99 euros. photos. The left screenshot is found when you click as an existing, already gained customer on an email reminder link where the selling company sends you an email. Well, probably your contact lenses have been used up. Maybe you want to buy another package, whereas the cheaper price you get offered when you enter via a Google search to that company, act like you are a new coming customer who might still be looking for a better price, and the company actually offers you the better price. The mechanism we see here always is the same common mechanism. Track a user, record everything. Interests, past behavior as a consumer, the readiness to spend, the friends, the used hard and software, and of course the price category connected with the hard and software the end user is using. If you are using a more expensive hardware device, probably you are a customer who is fit and happy to spend more, so you will be charged more. The technology uses all kinds of tricks. Cookies, that's why it's called cookie pricing, but also referrer headers, browser fingerprinting, canvas fingerprinting, IP address, battery status, social network mentions, user agent headers, OS fingerprinting, name it. There are numerous tracking technologies which can be used to follow and re-recognize a customer and information you have about that customer in the internet. And then use all that information on your customer to maximize the economic yield and give the customer a higher price if you have good reason to believe that he will be paying for it. So we could ask the question, why is guarding your privacy important? And even without any deeper ethics or morals, the answer is easy: for immediate monetary reasons. And we could answer that question: do I have something to hide in the internet? Yes. Information which can be used, or I would rather say abused, to be taken advantage of, not in my interest. Then, of course, you have probably already watched the interesting contribution of Dr. Thomas Mund, of Thomas, who in the summer school has a special case study, how we found out who refuses to wash hands, a case study on privacy. He gave that talk, and I think you will enjoy this particular view, which gives a very nice and very hands-on, close case study on privacy aspects. Or you might also want to read his scholarly publication, which I here have cited, and which has already gained international recognition by 25 citations of his works. And finally, I would like to show you a MIT case study on privacy on Facebook. The MIT study asked the question, how well can Facebook determine sexual orientation from the Friends network? The study looked at n equals 5,302 Facebook users in the study, and the only information they checked was the data on the profile of the Facebook friends of the participating users. The question they wanted to understand is, can an algorithm correctly predict sexual orientation only from looking at the friends network on Facebook? And the result was yes, and in 78% homosexual orientation in men and in 83% heterosexual orientation in men was correctly predicted. The area under the curve of that classification algorithm was 0.84, and we will have a short look at what area under the curve for a classification algorithm means in order to understand whether this is a good or a bad approach here by that algorithm. So we would like to understand how we evaluate a classification algorithm in general. What is a good prediction algorithm. The prediction algorithm can have false negatives and false positives. I look at a certain property, and if I claim the property is there all the time, then probably I will have no false positives, but I will have a large number of false negatives. And depending on how I balance the mechanism of the algorithm, I will have a number of false negatives and false positives, and probably, well, the optimum, of course, would be no false negatives and no false positives, but there will be some trade-off, and a good idea sometimes is to have a chance for false positives and false negatives be set equal and to adjust the algorithm in that way. Every algorithm is adjusted like that, and as a good measure for the overall classification algorithm, we use the area under the curve. In order to understand that, we will have a look into the next slide where we see the receiver operating curve of a classification algorithm. We see the sensitivity and the specificity, or actually here rather 1 minus the specificity in that curve, and every point on the thick black line shows us a possible adjustment of the algorithm. The gray diagonal, well, that's the situation we get by mere guessing. And the closer that black line is to the top x-axis, the better the algorithm. So we could say the larger the area under the curve, the better the algorithm. And of course, due to norming reasons, the value will be 0.5 for pure guessing, and the area under the curve at most can be 1. And if we look now into classical verbal descriptions we find in literature about classification algorithms, well, 0.5 is pure guessing, until 0.6 it's failed, then it's poor, it's fair, it's good, and 0.9 to 1 is excellent. So the MIT study came to the conclusion, looking at the Facebook profile of a person allows a good classification, good according to this verbal description, of the sexual orientation of that person. And of course, the MIT researchers asked themselves whether if we look at other situations, we would also get additional classifications of people, and they would like to also improve their results. So they did yet another study using nearly 50,000 people, and we see the results in our next slides, where we understand that the question whether you're smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, or whether you were single or in a relationship, and all kinds of other properties could easily be deduced merely by looking at your own friend's profile. Not at your own data, but the profile of your friends allows the deduction of these types of properties. Now, let's ask ourselves, how is this connected with IoT? Are there, and which are the specific questions we have to discuss when looking into IoT privacy? One perspective is the special legal protection. For some users, mobile phones know and store more intimate details than kids, parents, or even spouses of that person know. And for most users, I would say that IoT devices in general know and store much more intimate details. Now, we know in our legal system 2 specific forms of protection. Number 1, kids, parents, and spouses may refuse to give evidence. And the second protection is you are not obliged to incriminate yourself. Both rights are considered fundamental protection mechanisms for human relationships and for personal dignity. So one could ask in that situation, should there be a right to refuse the search of a mobile, of an IoT device, or of a data collection in the cloud, because they might be closer to you than your kids, your parents, your spouses. And also the issue of non-self-incrimination could easily be replaced by the question, well, have you done that? Have you been there and there? Are you liable of this and that deed? Well, you don't have to answer. Just give me your mobile. Just let me look into the data stored in your car or in your bike. Interesting question. Whose device is it after all? Apple decides on which apps you are able and you're allowed to install. Google has a kill switch, so Google can remotely remove apps from Android phones. Am I owning that device? Or am I only using a device which, well, in the true gist of the sense, is not really mine? What about the data collected by this device? And what about these data if they're collected somewhere, stored somewhere in the cloud? And let's break it down to a very concrete question. Whom should my car be allowed to tell that I'm driving too fast? The car knows. Position, speed. Is the car allowed to tell it to the service technician? To a policeman? Is the car obliged to do that? Can I interfere? Whose device, whose data is it after all? Or should it be informational self-determination? But the question, of course, also is, where does this end? Let's have a look at another perspective. One sometimes hears this statement, the hypothesis, data protection is protection of criminals. So we know Alexa, Cortana, Bixby, Google Assistant, as they are all called, listen in and may record conversations. Conversations may hold clues for a criminal case. And then, of course, the question is, under which conditions should the legal system be allowed access? Should it be allowed to access Alexa, recordings of Alexa, in order to prove that somebody murdered somebody? And we see here that this actually is not speculation, but there are actually a number of cases, and the one I'm citing here is not the only one, where this question really shows up. So we see privacy is a very important value, but it is a controversial value which has to be fit into the boundaries of society and into the boundaries of new technology. Since we are having new technological situations, we have to discuss as society where to place the limits of our privacy. It has a number of implications, and in this slot and in other units of our summer school, we had a chance of discussing where these limits can be placed. In another module, we will be talking about technology, approaches to this type of issue, how we can design systems to uphold privacy in a better way, different to what we have seen in some of the use cases in this unit. Thank you very much.